So let me tell you, a couple months ago, my sister came to me and asked me if I would make her a cabinet for the corner of her kitchen here. She had a couple requirements. One, it needed to have a spot for her coffee maker. Check. Two, it had to have a spot for some wine bottles. Check. Three, it had to have a spot for, let this open if I can. There we go. Three, had to have a spot for beverages, other beverages, adult beverages. Check. So anyway, in this episode, I'm going to show you how I made this corner cabinet. If you enjoy the video and you'd like to see more videos like this, I have a lot more to come, you can like and subscribe, and also check me out on Instagram, where you can see some of the other extra footage that I have. You know what? Just drinking something else. There we go. That'll do. Anyway, let's get to it.
So I get everything started by processing down my plywood into smaller, more manageable pieces. These pieces are for my carcass as well as the wine rack. Once I get them all cut down in smaller pieces with the track saw, I use the table saw to get their final dimensions. And you'll see later that I made a mistake during this process that will come back to haunt me a little bit later, but I make it work. So I put my dado blade in the table saw because I am using rabbet joints to hold my cabinet carcass together. So what I'm doing here is I start with the innermost cut, and then I gradually just move the fence closer and closer, removing all the waste. So I set the height of the blade at 5/8 of an inch, that leaves an eighth left, and then I also move the fence in from the outer part of the blade 3/4 of an inch. That'll give me that nice overlap that I'm looking for. All the extra stuff in this here I just clean up with a chisel. Now earlier I got a little ahead of myself with the track saw. I accidentally cut the wine rack material out of the 3/4 inch ply. I had special 1/2 inch for the wine rack so I could use all the 3/4 for two separate carcasses that I was going to put together. But since I wasted a bunch of the 3/4, I didn't have enough to actually make the two carcasses, so I had to combine them into one. Just had the little improvisation, but it worked in the end. Now, after gluing, clamping, and making sure everything was square at the bottom, I used these spreaders and attached them to the tops and held them in place with just a couple pocket screws. Now, while the cabinet carcasses were drying in the clamps, I started to assemble the base. This corner here was the outside corner, so you were going to see, and I didn't want any edge, so I decided to miter this corner, and I just used some tape to hold that miter shut while I got this all glued up and in clamps. And the rest of the base were held together by, you guessed it, pocket holes. Now here I am using a flattening jig and some shims to mill down a flat side of some walnut that I'm going to use for the countertop. So I'm running it through the planer a few times using the jig until I get a nice flat side. Then I can just run the board alone to get the final thickness that I'm looking for. And now I'm back inside where I'm using the straightening jig to get a nice straight edge to glue my two countertop pieces together. This will give me a nice glue joint without using a joiner. And I just glue it up with a few clamps, making sure everything is nice and flat as I go. Yes, good job, Jared. Now, here I am covering up mistake number 2. In my haste to get everything glued up, I forgot to put in a 1/4-inch dado around the back edge of my cabinet carcass to accept the 1/4-inch panel for the back, because I'm an idiot. So here I am taking a rabbet joint and just going around the edge to put a now 1/2-inch back panel in. I just cleaned up the corners and it all worked out pretty good in the end. Now I am going to start cutting down some pieces of poplar for the face frame and some edge banding for the wine rack. I'm using poplar because I'm going to be painting this cabinet, and poplar paint's pretty darn nice. Now after getting all of my edge banding cut, I start gluing it down, and I'm using tape to hold them down because it's just a really effective and easy way to do edge banding, especially if you don't have enough clamps to hold down as many pieces as I had. Now switching gears while that dries, I start assembling the face frame, and I'm using pocket screws here, just clamping them down to my table so they don't move. If you don't clamp them, they tend to walk on you when you put the screws in, so I just like to clamp them down to something solid, and it goes really smooth that way. Now we're going to start the wine rack. I really thought a lot about how to make this thing, so I drew out a scale drawing. I'm kind of going for a double diamond look for the wine rack. I thought that was a really interesting look. I didn't want to just do it straight across. I took a lot of time in layout to make sure everything was right, and I started cutting in some dado grooves in the upper 2 pieces and the lower 2 pieces. Also had to cut some dado grooves into the 2 long cross pieces that crisscross through the middle. It's all very complicated. I'm surprised I got it right. And because this is a cross piece, I had to flip it and cut a dado in the same spot but on the opposite side of this panel. Hope that all makes sense. Kinda does in my head. Now I'm using my scale drawing just to lay out all of my pieces right on top of the drawing. It's all to scale, so I'm just making sure everything's working out right. Everything is square, just taping up the corners. I still have to measure out the other cross brace, that big piece in the middle, which I am doing here, just so I can cut the other 2 dado grooves. Now here I am working on the middle sections of the wine rack. I am cutting a 1/2 inch, I guess it would be a half lap joint with the dado from the back of this one, and then my next one I'll be cutting the 1/2 inch from the front, and they'll both go about halfway, and then they will slide nicely right into each other. Now, as I go along here, I'm constantly going back and forth and making sure everything fits. And up to this point, everything is going really nicely. Everything's fitting together as it should. You can see here the middle sections slide right into those dado grooves that I made. All those dados are about 1/8 of an inch deep. Now this is the last piece that I have to cut. It's the cross piece, and I'm just doing these half lap joints on these as well. So I did one on this from the back, and the other one I will come in from the face. And they slide together just like that. And then we'll put them all together to see how it fits. It's all very nerve-wracking when it all comes together. Little pounding here, little pounding there, and it all comes together just beautifully. Now back to the countertop, I put a final sanding on it. I used my track saw to get the final dimensions. And I finished it up by putting a nice little round over on the front and side of the countertop. I didn't have to do the other two sides because this is going to be in a corner. Then, of course, you had to sand it, so a little bit of hand sanding on the sides. And then I applied a finish. And for the finish, I used Odie's oil. And I really like this finish. It smells really great, and it gives a nice protection. So all I had to do, one step, one coat, rub it on, buff it off, and that's it. Okay, so you may be looking at this and saying, there's something a little off by this wine rack this isn't the same one you made just a couple minutes ago. And you would be right. Once I had that first one made, I started thinking that there might be just a little too much white. Everything was going to be white. I just thought about the wine bottles sliding in and out might mark it up a bunch. So I had some walnut laying around that I thought, that would make a good, nice contrast. It matched the top. So I just did all those steps you just saw me do. I did them all again, but this time I used walnut. And I'm tell you what, I'm super happy that I did, because I really like the end result and how it looks matching the top, and it all just came out really, really good. You don't always like doing things twice, but sometimes it's just the best way to do it. At least it went a little quicker because I knew pretty much what to do and what order and how everything went together, so it really wasn't all that bad. Now here I'm just cutting 45s on all the corners just to bevel them so they fit into the cabinet. They would just slide right in nice and snug. Just like, well, almost. Alright, well, there might be a little bit more adjustments to be made. So, pop it back out, sand a little bit. I didn't have to take much off, just sand those edges a little bit more, just to give me the clearance that I needed for it to slide nice and snug. Beautiful. Now, I did have a couple of gaps in some of my joinery, this one in particular, so all I did was just take some wood glue, mixed it in with some of the walnut dust I got from sanding it, and it's good as new. Now here I am making some spacers so that my drawer, when pulled out, would clear the face frame, because the face frame would be a little bit thicker than the plywood. Just glued them on. Just took a couple brad nails, just hold it in place. And now it is time to work on the drawers. So I just took some of the plywood that I had. This is the 1/2 inch, and I just cut it down to size to make a small drawer. And this time I remembered to cut in the dado groove at the bottom to accept the 1/4 inch bottom. Just insert it in each of the dado slots all around, and glue it and clamp it up, and she's good to go. Since I'm not getting paid for this, sorry sis, but no dovetails. Sorry, not sorry. But it worked. Now I am cutting out the frames for the one door and one drawer that I had. So again, it's poplar, easy to paint, paint's nice, finish is nice, so that's what I used. Now for the center of the door, I am using 1/4 inch MDF. Again, paint's great, so I just dadoed out a 1/4 inch groove on my rails and stiles of the door all the way around to accept that center panel. Now here I am cutting the tenons into the rails of my door. I want the tenons to fit into the dado groove on the stiles, so I set the fence at the depth of those grooves. And you would have been able to see this if some jerk didn't put a clamp right in the way. I tell you what, it's a bunch of amateurs. Now, I also set the height of the blade to just nick that dado groove. So the tenon will be a 1/4 inch, the same size as that groove, so it fits nice and snug. Now, after cutting my rails and stiles and getting the tenons, I used the MDF for the center, so I cut them down to size. And after getting everything cut and ready to go, I start to assemble the door. And you can see that that center panel fits nicely into those grooves all the way around. The tenons fit nicely into the groove as well, and the door goes together somewhat relatively easy. Come on, Jared, you got this. There you go, hit it. There you go. And almost there. You can do it, buddy. You can do it, buddy. Beautiful. Look at that door. Perfect. Now for the center of the drawer, I used 1/2 inch MDF, and I cut a rabbet joint on all 4 sides of the center. This way, when you lined it up with the drawer box, it would meet it nice and flush, and when you screw it in, there's no give. It's nice and flat, nice and strong drawer front. So after getting that dado cut out, you can see how it matches nice and flush with the back of the drawer, and I still have that little reveal on the front. So I just put a little bit of glue on the tenons. I didn't glue the center. I didn't think I really needed to, but I glued the tenons, slid the stiles right in there perfectly, and a little bit of push, got a drawer face. Nice. Now I'm just marking out the holes for the slides and just screwing them into the side of the cabinet. And then I marked off the center of the drawers to accept the slides. And screw those in. Now, time for a little test fit, see if everything works, and thankfully it does. Now, I'm using double-sided tape to hold the drawer face on while I get everything screwed down. I checked my measurements, make sure I have a good reveal all the way around, then just open the drawer and just use some cabinet screws to screw it into place. Now I'm just using a Forstner bit to countersink the hole for the hinges. And once I get that done, I just mark for the screws and move on to the cabinet itself, where I am just pre-drilling for the hardware, and lastly screw it all in, see if it works. And what do you know, it works. Yeah, you ever seen a guy so happy to see a door close? Now I am going to glue on the face frame, so I just run a bead of glue all the way around. I use some clamps to hold it in place while I get everything situated. It also helps to get a little hip into it. Just make sure all your edges are lined up as good as you can. Now, this is a little trick I got from Jason Hibbs of Bourbon Moth Woodworking. He's a really talented woodworker that I enjoy watching. He uses an epoxy putty to fill in this gap from your face frame to the cabinet carcass. I don't know if I'm very good at this part right now because it didn't seem to want to really stick. Every time I tried to push it in, it kind of flaked off, but I got it on. Now I am just routing the face frame flush to the cabinet itself all the way around so I could slide in the wine rack. Now once the epoxy putty is dry, you just sand it. I don't really have to worry about burning through the plywood because I am painting this. I just want to get rid of that groove. Now I am taking a chisel and just squaring off the corners from the rounded router bit. Just making them nice and straight, clean as possible. Now, with the help of my favorite, most awesome shop assistant, who apparently ignores everything about shop safety and wears socks, they are nice socks, we draw an arc at the top of the wine area. Then I just use the jigsaw to cut it out. For the drawer, I'm just putting a coat of shellac onto it. Nothing fancy, just something to do the job. As for the rest of the cabinet, I am using Sherwin-Williams Emerald enamel paint. This stuff is pretty good, but right now I am just putting a base coat primer down, and I've never used the HVLP sprayer before. I don't think I really had the settings where they should have been. They seemed pretty light to me, but I got the hang of it, and I think I dialed it in as I painted further and further with it. But it was kind of fun to use. I did mix the paint with some water. Just cut it down to make it more sprayable. Look at that technique. I got it. And after a coat of primer and 2 coats of paint, I start installing all the hardware back where it goes. And assemble the drawers, put the drawer faces back on, all the hinges, and start marking off for the pools. Now, I didn't have any fancy jigs or anything to help me out. I haven't done too many drawer pools, but I just measured them out, pre-drilled them, and then I put it up where I wanted it to go, and I just used some furniture screws to go through the drill holes to hold it in place. And then I just open the door so I can attach the face. Then once I got the face where it should be, I took the screws out and continued to drill my way through the drawer, through those holes as pilot holes. And I just screwed in my handle. Super easy way to do it. Then I just had to reinstall my doors, screwing them in place with the holes that were already there. Now, this is why I made the base separate, so I could make sure everything was level, because it's easier to level off the base than to try to level the whole cabinet. But it was all good, so I just screwed it right into some studs, and that was it. All I had to do was bring the cabinet in now and set it right on top. Now, in hindsight, I wish I would have left that side a little long so I could scribe it to the wall, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Now here I am drilling out some insets so I could insert these little figure 8 washers on there to hold the top on. I just did, I think 4. Okay, now listen. Somehow it got loose. And I don't know how, because I test fitted it and before it painted, and it fit fine. It was snug. So I don't know what happened. But I got these little furniture pads and I just stuck them on the sides. I thought that would be just enough to hold it tight in place because I wasn't gonna glue this in. And sure enough, go, just slide on in.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did enjoy it and like to see future videos that I have coming out, and there's a lot more to come, please consider hitting that subscribe button. You could also check me out on Instagram at SpadeMade. So until then, have a good one, keep creating, and I'll see you next time on SpadeMade. Oh man, I learned how to make a drink.